Mr. Woodward, I need you to look at this ledger before you sign anything. That's what a 26-year-old accounts clerk named Alan Price said to Tom Jones across a mahogany table in a solicitor's office in London. And by the time Tom finished reading the pages Alan slid toward him, he understood, for the first time in 22 years, exactly how little of his own fortune had ever truly belonged to him. May 1986, Chancery Lane, 6 days after Gordon Mills was buried. Alan had been hired 8 months earlier, fresh out of his articled clerkship, to help settle the estate of Management Agency and Music Limited, MAM, the company Gordon Mills had built around Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck, and Gilbert O'Sullivan. Nobody had warned him the ledgers would be difficult to untangle. Nobody had warned him that a superstar would be sitting across the table, waiting, when he finally understood what he was looking at. The room was small, a single window overlooking a wet street. A clerk's trolley of estate boxes stacked against the wall, most of them still sealed. "Start from 1964, Tom said quietly. "I want to see where it begins." So Alan did. Pontypridd, 1964. Thomas Woodward was 23 years old, married young, a baby already at home, singing in working men's clubs for whatever the landlord would hand him at closing time. His voice was too big for those rooms, and everyone in the valley knew it. Everyone except the record companies in London, who had already turned him down twice. Gordon Mills found him in a smoky club above a pub in Pontypridd and told him something nobody else ever had, that the voice was worth more than the town around it. "Sign here," Gordon said, sliding a contract across the kitchen table in his own flat. "I'll handle everything else. You just sing." Tom signed. He didn't read every clause. Why would he? He was a Coal Town singer who'd left school at 16 to work. Gordon was the sharp one, the one with London contacts, the one who already believed in him when the record men wouldn't return a phone call. Within a year, It's Not Unusual was #1 in Britain. Within 5 years, Tom Jones owned Rolls-Royces, a mansion outside London, and a Las Vegas contract worth more than his father had earned in a lifetime underground at the colliery. And Gordon Mills owned the company that owned nearly all of it. By 1969, Management Agency and Music controlled the television show, the tours, the publishing, the percentages, every pound running through Gordon's desk before it ever reached Tom's hand. Tom signed what was placed in front of him, usually standing, usually between rehearsal in a car waiting outside. He trusted the man who had pulled him out of Pontypridd, and for years, trust was enough. It had to be. There wasn't time to be anything else. "Don't worry about the numbers, Tiger," Gordon used to tell him, tossing a folder shut before Tom had finished the first page. "Worry about the show." So Tom worried about the show. He filled Vegas showrooms 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week, for 2 decades straight. He learned every light cue, every band entrance, every note Elvis Presley whispered to him backstage at the International. He never once asked to see the books. Nobody around him did either. Not the band, not the road manager, not even Linda, who ran their household but never the company. Everyone assumed somebody else was watching the numbers. Backstage at the International Hotel, Elvis Presley used to tease him about it. "You let that man run the whole show, Tom?" Elvis asked once, half joking, half not, leaning against a dressing room mirror between sets. Tom laughed it off, the way he laughed off most things in those years. He had a voice that could fill a showroom without a microphone if it had to. Numbers on a page felt like somebody else's job entirely. Gordon's job. The one thing Gordon had always insisted on carrying alone. The signs came slowly, the way they always do. A tour bonus that never appeared in the year-end statement. A songwriting credit split 3 ways on a hit Tom had written the melody for alone, without anyone explaining why. A house in California Tom wanted to buy outright in his own name, and being told, gently, that it would be easier and more efficient through the company instead. One question unanswered, then another, brushed aside with a laugh. Then a third Tom didn't even bother asking anymore, because the answer was always the same 3 words. Gordon handles it. There was a fourth moment, smaller than the others, that Tom would only understand years later. A fellow performer at Caesars mentioned, in passing, that his own manager sent him a full statement every quarter, every dollar, every deduction, itemized and mailed to his home. Tom had never received a statement like that in his life. He didn't ask why. He went back to rehearsal instead because the show started at 8, and the show had never once let him down. By the time Gordon Mills was diagnosed with cancer in early 1986, Tom Jones was 45 years old and had never once, in 22 years, seen a complete account of what management agency and music actually owned in his name. Not the publishing, not the master recordings, not the shares in the company that carried his own face on its letterhead. Gordon Mills died that May in a London hospital with Tom at his bedside. He was 51. The 2 men had built an empire together without Tom ever fully knowing where the walls of it stood. At the funeral, Tom stood at the front of the church in a dark suit, shook hands with men from MAM he barely recognized, and accepted condolences for a friendship that had lasted 22 years, longer than most marriages, longer than his own mother had known him as a grown man. He assumed, standing there, that whatever came next would be straightforward, a transfer of paperwork, a formality. He had no reason yet to think otherwise. That's when it happened. The solicitors called in outside accountants to settle MAM's affairs, and the estate handed young Alan Price a stack of ledgers nobody senior at the firm wanted to touch. Publishing rights, company shares, percentage splits going back to 1964, some of them never fully explained to the man whose name was on every recording those pages described. Alan found the clause first, buried in a 1964 founding agreement. Then he found it again, restructured differently in a 1971 amendment nobody had flagged for review. Then a third time, folded into a new subsidiary formed in 1979, a company Tom Jones had signed into existence without a second read, on a day he later couldn't even remember. Not one arrangement, not 2, all 3. I've cross-checked it twice, Alan told the senior partner, his hands not quite steady on the folder. He needs to see this himself. Not a summary, not a letter, the actual pages in his own hands. The partner hesitated, then nodded. That was how a 26-year-old clerk, who had never met a famous person in his life, ended up alone in a small room with Tom Jones, sliding a ledger across a table, watching a man who had filled Caesar's palace for a decade go completely, entirely silent. Alan had rehearsed a short explanation on the walk down the corridor. Company structure, percentage terms, the difference between a founding agreement and an amendment. He never used any of it. Tom simply reached across the table, turned the ledger to face himself, and started reading from the top of the first page, one line at a time, The way a man reads something he already suspects will change him. Tom read for 11 minutes without speaking. Alan counted them off the wall clock because he didn't know what else to do with his hands, and because the silence in that room felt like something that shouldn't be interrupted. "I signed all of this," Tom finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Alan said. "Every page has your signature." "He never lied to me," Tom said, almost to himself. "He just never told me the whole of it." Alan didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that belonged to him to give. He was 26, 3 months into settling an estate, and the man across from him had just watched 2 decades of trust rearrange itself in his hands. Tom closed the ledger, set his hand flat on the cover, the way a man might rest a hand on a coffin. He sat there a long moment in a stranger's solicitor's office. 22 years of Vegas marquees and gold records and sold-out television specials collapsing quietly into a stack of paper that a junior clerk had pulled from a sealed filing box that same week. "Thank you," Tom told him, "for not letting me sign the next one blind." Within the year, Tom Jones handed control of what remained of his career to his own son, Mark Woodward, a man who had never managed an artist before, who had grown up watching his father's name on marquees his father never fully owned. It was not the safe choice. Every advisor in that solicitor's office argued for a professional firm, someone with credentials, someone who had done this before. Tom chose his son anyway. It was the only choice he trusted completely. Mark rebuilt the business from close to nothing, learning contract law and publishing rights the way his father had once learned to stage, by standing in the middle of it and refusing to leave. Father and son sat together at a kitchen table not unlike the one in Gordon's old flat, except this time Tom read every clause out loud before either of them signed anything. And if a term confused him, they stopped until it didn't. 2 years later, in 1988, Kiss, the Prince cover produced with Art of Noise, put Tom Jones back on the radio for the first time in over a decade. And this time, every contract carried his own son's signature beside his. In ink, Tom had read himself, page by page, before signing. Alan Price stayed in accountancy in London for another 30 years. He kept a photocopy of that first ledger page in his desk drawer the entire time. Not out of pride, he said later, but as a reminder of the exact moment he understood what his job was actually for. In 2015, Tom Jones published a memoir, Over the Top and Back. In it, at 74 years old, he wrote in plain words what he had never said publicly in 50 years of interviews, that for more than 2 decades he had not truly controlled his own career, his own publishing, or, for long stretches, his own money. He wrote it without bitterness. Gordon Mills had also made him. Both things were true at once, and Tom let them both stand on the page. "He gave me the world," Tom told an interviewer that year, "and he never once handed me the key to the room it was locked in. I had to ask someone else to find that key for me." Alan Price, retired by then, read the memoir alone in his flat in Surrey and recognized his own handwriting in a footnote crediting the accountants who settled the MAM estate in 1986. He hadn't known Tom remembered his name at all. He'd only been in that room for 11 minutes, 30 years before. He wrote Tom a short letter that autumn, mostly out of instinct, thanking him for the mention and saying he still remembered the sound of the clock in that solicitor's office. 6 weeks later, a reply came back in Tom's own hand, 4 lines long, ending with a line Alan kept for the rest of his life. "You did your job properly. Not many people ever have around me." He had it framed. It hung in his hallway in Surrey until the day he died. The ledger itself no longer exists. The physical pages were archived and later lost in a 2003 office relocation. One clerk's small, quiet tragedy nobody else ever noticed or mourned. But the number written inside it never left Tom Jones. He kept it the way he kept everything from Pontypridd, quietly, without complaint, turned into something he could still stand up in front of 18,000 people and sing straight through. A boy from a Welsh coal town had been told once that his voice was worth more than the valley around it. It was. He simply hadn't known, for 22 years, that it was worth more than he had ever been shown. And it took a stranger, 26 years old, 11 quiet minutes, and a stack of paper nobody senior wanted to touch to finally show him. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. It helps stories like this one keep reaching people who still remember what real trust costs. And tell us, has someone you trusted completely ever kept the whole truth from you, even without ever telling a single lie? Share it in the comments.